Hi, I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm Eric Herman.
Welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. We have a great show today. We're going to be joined in about 15 minutes by Jamie DeWolf, the great-grandson of L Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, so stay tuned for that. We're going to start off with a couple of bits of news first, and then talk about Eric and what he does for the secular and atheist community. So in the news today of interest, since we do have Jamie DeWolf on, is that Tom Cruise just settled or dropped his $50 million lawsuit against Bauer Media, where he was suing for defamation because they had implied that he had basically abandoned his daughter. During discovery, it came out that he really has hardly seen his daughter over the last 180 days. So it kind of, I guess, encouraged him enough to drop that $50 million lawsuit. So we'll, I don't know if we'll talk about that a little bit later with Scientology, how it prizes its star, people that really run the show. There's different levels of Scientology. Right now, you had a bit of news also on the atheist billboard in New York.
Yeah, it seems that the New York Senator Andrew Lanza doesn't like it very much. He thinks that the atheists basically have no right to their free speech, even though the creationists had their billboard out, a message to our atheist friends, thank God it's not true. But
well, like, thank God you atheists have it wrong, something to that effect.
The atheists, that you have it wrong, but he wants to actually, I guess, sue us to, he's saying the politicians should forbid our speech, which they seem to cry about a lot, not being able to push their religion every 5 minutes.
Well, they do have a point. That's right there in the First Amendment, freedom of speech, except for atheists or except against religion or except against Christianity.
Yeah, I didn't get that other, the clauses in there.
That must be in my own constitution. So tell us about, you have the Nondescript Atheist radio show. Tell us what that's about, how you started doing it.
Well, I'm actually up to episode 10 now. I'm still fairly new at it, still cutting off like the first 10 minutes sometimes, forgetting to put the memory stick in. But we're getting the technical glitches out. What I'd like to do with the show is to get as many clergy and theologians on the show. My theory is that atheists talking to atheists about atheism to an audience of atheists can drag on a bit. I want to get alternate point of view.
Right.
So I'm trying to get, I got a presuppositionalist evangelist on. I got a Wiccan on, a Muslim, a Catholic priest a couple weeks ago. And in the future, my brother-in-law is actually a Methodist minister, so he's promised to come on the show. He's a little bit busy right now because of, the Jesus birthday thing and everything. Okay. But he's promised to come on, and I also have an ex-Methodist minister, who I'm trying to get on the show too. So we'll see how that pans out. So
for the format, do you sit there and kind of debate with them, or you just try to get their point of view and you offer a counter view?
Well, the point of the show is you get enough of the real ad hominem attacks and the really pointed questions on other podcasts. I'm trying to get more of a conversation going. I want to hear, why do you do what you do, and get their views. We try to do a certain theme for the show. Like for the Catholic priest, we did morality. I wanted to hear what his idea of morality was and how it differed from mine. In fact, both of our moralities are similar. The basis of them differ. And it was fun trying to get out of him what was his basis for morality versus mine, and for him to try to figure out where I'm coming from. So it's more of a discussion, definitely with pointed questions, but I figure that the more religious people are on the show, at least, I'm not trying to convince the religious person to change their belief, but if the audience hears a wide enough array of beliefs, counter to mine, which I think is pretty good, then I think that may make some people think about how unoriginal their
It may also emerge that you guys end up sharing a lot of morality. You probably don't advocate rape, murder, lying, right, stealing, cheating, and for humanist values. And so they might attribute it to Jesus, and you just say, I'm a social primate. I know we have to be kind to each other and decent to each other, and I've arrived at these same things without all the kind of dirty, evil, nasty baggage that can go along with some
religions. If you think about it, if you were to list out every single thing that you believe, everything from this is an iPad to I think that killing is wrong, list out every single thing that you believe, I think that there's not many people on Earth where you're not more than 99.99% agreement. I think it's just some of the political beliefs, not even all of them. Like, I'm not a libertarian, but I do believe that government should be a little smaller. I'm not a religious person, but I think that do unto others as you would have them do unto you is kind of a good idea. I think a lot of the beliefs are the same there. And I think the more you talk with people, the more you find out people's motivations are similar, people's beliefs are similar, and if we can get the more people in a conversation, the more others will find out that, yeah, the atheists are not that evil. I mean, even the Wiccans.
Right, it kind of sort of normalize atheism a little if they see you just having a rational, kind, decent conversation. One thing, just as you're talking, Peter Boghossian has his new book out, A Manual for Creating Atheists, and he's very firm. There's nothing wishy-washy about him, but he really advocates, instead of going after somebody's religion and talking about their God and all the bad things, to talk about how did you come to your way of understanding the world.
Right.
And that sounds a little bit like what you do. If you talk to a Catholic priest, why do you believe in this? How do you have morality? If you can do it in a sort of friendly manner where they're doxastically open and they're listening and they're not in a defensive mode, you can make a lot of progress.
And I do try to do that. I do try to use, he advocates sort of the Socratic method. And one thing I try to do on my show is ask questions. You said this, why do you believe this, or what makes you say this, and get them to come out and explain. A lot of religious people have not really thought about what they believe. If you ask them a simple question like, what is God? They can't define it. It's sort of this amorphous, super intelligent, super being that we can't see.
Right, and it's always important to separate out, professional apologists who have thought about it and have a very slippery definition from just average people who may not have given it so much thought. And I don't know if you deal with apologists. You said something about having a presuppositional. That must have been interesting.
And you'd be surprised at how much they haven't thought about what they believe either, because again, you try to ask them questions, and the more you ask them questions, yet they get this barrier they hit where, okay, I got past all of my bumper stickers, my canned responses, and well, you just have to have faith.
Right, and that's the cop-out. You just have to believe without any proof of it, or you have to leap over the probabilities, as I think John Loftus said, to have that faith in what plainly isn't so.
And it becomes blatantly obvious when they just have nothing more to say.
Right, I noticed Justin Vacula we had on once, and we played part of a debate that he had with one of the priests, and Justin did end up trying to bring, I forgot if he brought up slavery or some moral issues, and this was in front of the audience where the minister didn't want to talk about it. It wasn't in their pre-agreed upon debate topics. And I think maybe the question came from the audience. And so I think for religious people to see that happen, see you have that interaction, and that atheist guy seems to have a lot of decent human reasons why he believes stuff.
Right.
How come our guy can't? Why did we think slavery was okay for
so many
couple hundred years?
Well, with the presuppositionalist, the presuppositionalist position is that you have to presuppose knowledge before you can know anything, and their claim is that you have to have a belief in God to have this knowledge. So I asked him, what is the more reliable knowledge? Is it what he gets from God or what he gets from his five senses? Because I can't think of a way to get information except for your five senses. And he said, well, yeah, from the Bible, from the God. And so I went back and said, well, how do you read the Bible? What sense, you have to trust your senses to know that the Bible itself says what it says. So you are trusting your senses more than what you're reading, because you're using your senses to read. And that stopped him a little bit.
Yeah, and if you look at all the different religions in the world, how come there's not one universal thing that all the religious people have agreed upon? They've been killing each other for thousands of years because the Protestants disagree with the Catholics, hate the Jews, hate the Muslims, don't believe the Hindus. We all have all these different reasons. So clearly, if God is trying to make his actual truthful case heard, God is not very good at this, which is funny for an omnipotent, omniscient, he doesn't care.
He has to come down and set the record straight.
Yeah. Let me ask one more question, and then we're going to get to Jamie.
Sure.
Can you tell us, how did you get into activism in the first place? What was the draw? Was it the money, the lucrative career path that we have as atheists?
It was back in the bulletin board days, if you remember those. Actually, it was at Michigan State. There's a group that was on campus called the Maranatha Fellowship, and there's a building over there called Wells Hall that had this wall in front of it, sort of a garden behind it, and they'd stand up on this wall and have all their, I say flunkies, but to be kind, their members form a semicircle around so that when people pass between classes, they would stop and say, oh, there's some kind of something happening here, and then they'd preach to them. My friends and I would jump up on the wall with them and start debating them. And they didn't like that very much, but it was fun. And that's how I sort of got into it.
That was your entry.
Yeah, it was around that time when I finally admitted to myself that, I really don't have any belief in any of this stuff, so I guess I'm an atheist.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. I know Eric's going to help out with the show occasionally. We only have a few of us doing the host, so we really appreciate you pitching in. And now, Jamie DeWolf, we're going to start off by showing you a clip of some of the fantastic stuff he does. He does slam poetry amongst a bunch of other things. And so I apologize. Usually when we edit a clip down, sometimes it can actually improve it, and you just go to the good points. When you have somebody who's a poet who's already done this stuff, it really just cuts it down so we can fit it into the time we have available. So Jamie will hopefully tell us later where you can go to kind of see all of his stuff in its full thing. All right, so let's go to that clip.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Every family has their black sheep. On my mother's side, our black sheep was a shepherd who enslaved his own flock. The king of the Khans, a man who made himself a messiah, even though he never called himself a god. Even tonight, his words are written in steel and titanium capsules in a nuclear-reinforced bunker miles underground, so if our whole species goes extinct, his words will still survive. He was a subject we never talked about at the kids' table at family reunions, but he was my great-grandfather, L Ron Hubbard. Lafayette Ron Hubbard. He was born a storyteller, a science fiction writer, a golden-tongued grifter who could write a book in any genre while the publisher waited downstairs in the hotel lobby. Just another name on dime store pulp mags, paid only a penny a page until 1949 when he said, "You want to know how you really get rich? You start a religion." A year later, he kept to his word, wrote Dianetics, transforming science fiction into fact, until you could pay to flatline your mind for a fee. Overnight, he went from pennies to a prophet, until the world demanded to see his evidence. But L. Ron knew if you don't have facts, all you need is faith. So he turned his science into a religion, and Scientology was born. Trained in the arts of electrified hypnotism, blackmail, and beatdowns, he learned to hide his crimes behind his charisma. And it took him a decade to see the holes behind the holy, the man behind the myth, his father. But his father always understood retribution better than redemption, and he stalked his son with wiretaps, break-ins, and death threats. My grandfather coming home to photographs of his children in his mailbox, playing on playgrounds, alone and unguarded, to remind him the eye of the pyramid never blinks.
So, Jamie, thank you for joining us. That's how long does it take you to put something like that together? I know it's harder to write something short than long, and that you pack so much into those couple minutes.
I actually wrote that in a week. So that was, I wrote that the week before the actual performance of that show. which is one reason why I think I close my eyes so much when I watch it, because I'm trying to remember what else I'm about to say. It was a subject that had, been on my mind obviously my entire life, but in trying to figure out how to tackle it and condense it into one piece, the only way that I could sort of crack that, when you have less than 10 minutes to tackle the entire history of, a cult, what do you talk about? Do you talk about what they believed? Do you talk about who L Ron really was? Do you talk about what their legacy is now, how it affects me, etc.? And the way I was able to figure it out was simply by focusing on the relationship between a father and a son. And I felt like they were a microcosm, because in many ways, his son, L Ron Hubbard Jr., my grandfather, was just as much of a perpetuator of the church's abuses, as well as a victim himself, and ultimately was one of the major reasons as to what helped unveil and unmask who his father really was. And they basically went to war with each other for most of their lives. And I felt like within that relationship of just those two, and how it sort of comes down and relates to me, made it a little more understandable in terms of the human toll that the cult takes. The episode was based around family relationships, and I said to one of the executive producers, Glenn Washington, I said, well, I could write a piece about the L Ron thing, and he was like, you have to do that. And I said, I don't know. I was like, your show might get sued. You might have people coming after you. You don't really know what you're asking. And he had actually come from a cult himself when he was growing up. I think it was called Children of God, I'm forgetting, but he talks a lot about it on his show, Snap Judgment, on NPR. And he was incredibly encouraging towards it. And so that was what led me to write it. And as soon as I had finished the piece and had kind of gotten through it, then I was able to really think a little more about the actual sort of cultural impact it might have. I really don't think I was actually prepared, or even really that cognizant of when I was preparing for the piece, or even doing it, that this is going to be like passed around the world and lead to numerous interviews and so forth. I kind of just viewed it as another show, and I just want to make sure that I don't look like an idiot.
Well, you didn't look like...
There was the performer part of me, and then there was the thinking about the cultural zeitgeist or whatever, any of that kind of factors came later. Even now, I think I'd like to transform that piece into a short film so I can really pay more attention to fitting more of the lines in there. I even watched that. I haven't seen that in a while, and noticed that there were some lines that I forgot to say, and and so forth. So, but yeah, it was actually a pretty quick process, and wow. I talked a lot to my family about it and wanted to make sure that it was as dead on accurate as I could possibly get. And that actually started kind of a larger conversation in general about a lot of stuff that people didn't really want to discuss for most of my life. So.
Well, you said that your great-grandfather was a storyteller. I think the genes were passed down in this case.
Well, thank you.
No, and also one of the points we try to make on the show is that this really does take a toll. It really does affect real people, and right. I think you bring that home in a real clear way. We also, Rick Wingrove and Larry Mendoza, a couple other hosts, interviewed Laura DiCrescenzo a few weeks ago, and she told about her attempts to kind of escape from Scientology, how her children were being used against her. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, sort of the cult aspects, and once you realize a lot of Scientology or all of it may be bogus, do they say, well, okay, have a nice day, thanks for trying us, or is it very different to get out of that? Because most people know nothing about Scientology unless they right. watch your stuff or read it.
Well, that's the main hustle of Scientology, is that you're not supposed to know anything about it. The idea is that Dianetics is basically an introductory guide that's going to introduce you to the basic precepts. But the idea is that you're paying your way and committing yourself to hundreds and thousands of hours upon what they call the bridge to total freedom. And at the top of the bridge of this total freedom, you attain godlike powers and telepathy, and can move through space and time and have perfect memory and total recall of all of your past lives. You're also free from any sort of traumatic events in this life and in the past. And so the entire structure of the cult, if you take that bridge, which goes to a top point, which at this point is OT level 8, wow. L Ron claimed that there were going to be other levels past that, but they've never been able to bring those forth. that if you simply flip that bridge vertically, that you'll see it's clearly a pyramid scheme. It's like you start at the bottom, and it's cheaper, and it takes less time. Depending upon your budget, they can move you faster or slower up the bridge, but you keep moving towards this top point, which is far different from, say, Christianity, which is what I grew up as a Baptist Christian, is that it's actually a very simple transaction. You can get saved in a Sunday. You can simply come up to the front and pastor decrees that you're saved. And so there's two elements that are happening when people are leaving the church. One, the farther along they are, the more secrets that they possess, so they jealously guard those. They actually make people sign non-disclosure agreements a lot of times when they leave the church. And also the way that they deal with their enemies and their opponents is that instead of viewing someone as an atheist or a non-believer, or even potentially have sympathy for the fact that you're going to be going to hell or going to live a life of suffering, or whatever way that Scientology would kind of phrase or what the parallel would be, is that the difference is that they view anybody that is attempting to discredit Scientology or discredit L Ron Hubbard, they basically declare them a suppressive person, which is actually all over their literature. And Tom Cruise even talks about, where he talks about kind of horrifyingly about imagining a fantastical planet where there's no SPs left, meaning that there's no critics, there's no anybody to question Scientology whatsoever, because they view them as, I believe it's less than 5% of the population, but they view them as literally sociopathic individuals who are out to destroy the last promise and gift to humanity, and so therefore they should be destroyed. And so when you are labeled and designated a suppressive person, then they have what's called fair game policy, which means quite literally you can be lied to, tricked, sued, and destroyed. Basically, by any means necessary, shut this person up and completely demolish their life in any way, in any crime that it takes. So whether that's just bludgeoning them with lawsuits for decades. I've met people who had lawsuits to Scientology for over 20 years of their life.
Wow.
Or whether it's blackmail tactics, strong arm tactics, whether it's just threats, whether it's calling your house every night. I mean, the evidence and the thousands of times that this has happened to people who've left the church, people who are top ranked members of the church, who even were, my grandfather, L Ron Hubbard Jr., actually wrote a lot of this protocol when he was a member of the cult. So it's like later when they would use some of the same tactics on him, it would sort of connect the dots, because he had done a lot of these tactics himself, blackmail techniques, because the other thing is that when you do the main process, which is, I guess you could compare to Catholic confession, there is no arrangement, especially legally, that's protecting any of these secrets, that these secrets Scientology owns, and they keep them in filing cabinets. So if you want to leave, they have every dirty confession that you've ever had, every sexual experience, every sexual fantasy, any crimes that you've committed. They're constantly digging for dirt, and they hold it over people when they leave. So, I mean, the abuse on getting out, they're probably the most vengeful towards their ex-members, because these people possess these secrets that they want to zealously and pretty ferociously hold on to, because they know if these secrets are exposed, they don't have anything to sell you. That's why their battles with Anonymous and their battles with all these ex-members that have left become so just like absolutely like almost like life and death battles, because to Scientology, they're fighting for the very holiest of their scriptures. I mean, the Xenu doctrine and the OT level 3 and stuff. I mean, we can find that on the internet in a mouse click, and South Park can make satire about it. But I mean, 20 years ago, that was locked. That was locked in a vault. I mean, you literally had to achieve that secret magical level, and it was given to you in a briefcase, that was basically handcuffed to your wrist, and you could take it into a special room that was under guard. So, I mean, these were very dangerous secrets to undermining the entire cult itself, which is why they're so vicious to go toe-to-toe with. Not to mention they have their own secret police, which I'm pretty sure Christians don't have. Salvation Army isn't exactly the KGB. Wow. So, you know, I mean, it's just the way that they approach people, which is very unique and which makes them incredibly dangerous and pretty nefarious in the way that they deal with people.
But, you know, I think it's also important that we have to differentiate between people that are an individual Scientologist because their parent was, or they walked into it not knowing, versus kind of the organization, and have a little empathy, I guess, for people trying to walk away from it. May mean walking away from their kids, facing that the rest of their life they're going to be hunted and hounded with real threats that you said. This isn't just, we intellectually don't like you anymore. They actively go out and try to destroy these people's lives.
Sounds like it's like an ex-girlfriend on steroids.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's
knows all your secrets and it's going to go after you.
Right, and I think it's great that you're bringing this to people's awareness, because again, until you know, our producer knows some stuff about Scientology, got me reading a book about it, until I actively went to read it, I'm stunned. When I read a book about Mormons, I didn't realize all the violence in their dark history. And reading about Scientology, it goes beyond anything I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of it is that it was definitely came out of the Cold War era, and L. Ron himself was obsessed with CIA subterfuge. He was obsessed with you know, these kind of top secret spy games. And so the farther you get into Scientology, and especially if you become immersed in its structure, if you become a member of Sea Org, where you literally sign away your soul for 1 billion years, that is part of your contract. The idea is that
and tell people what Sea Org is so they can follow with you.
I'm sorry. Well, Sea Org is basically, it's like Scientology's elite. It's kind of the elite inner circle of Scientology. Some would argue it could be viewed as the most diehard believers, like the Knights Templar, or the, you know, or some people could argue that it was like the SS or Gestapo. I mean, these are the people that are diehard. They sign their soul over for 1 billion years with the idea that as soon as you die, you need to get back to Earth and grab yourself another shell and jump in that and get back to work and get right back to doing the good work of Scientology. And this started around, the Sea Org started generally as a term because these are the people who were the closest inner circle of L. Ron Hubbard that were basically guarding him in his last sort of outlaw decade, where he was traveling from international you know, port to port on this ship, and he had always sort of fancied himself as a kind of pseudo-military commander based off his military service earlier. And so it was this inner circle, the people who defended his identity, who attacked all of his critics, and that also sort of evolved into what was known then as the Guardian Office, which is now called OSA, Operation of Special Affairs. And OSA, their job is primarily to deal with critics. They're the people who do the dirty work. They do what they call black ops, that they run on people. They're the people that handle blackmail, intimidation, harassment. I mean, that's a lot of their job, is to handle threats. And they deem anybody that's leaving the church or anybody that is, you know, saying dissenting opinions against Scientology or L. Ron in particular to, of course, be threats. And so you're designated, you can be designated suppressive person, designated fair game. And that's something that's incredibly unique to Scientology and cults in this era in general, is that they have sort of a whole kind of security detail that's very based and focused on surveillance, character assassination, and coming after their critics basically with guns blazing. It's also important to note that they're very adamant about a disconnection policy. So when people do leave the church, what keeps a lot of people terrified from leaving is that they know that they can be forced, that their family members that are still inside the religion can be given a disconnection order, basically, where they are forced to cease all contact with that family member. So I've met people who can no longer speak to their mom. You know, they can't speak to their kids. They can't speak to their husband. They can't send them a letter. They can't, you know, give them a phone call or attempt to even explain themselves. And that actually keeps some people even inside, because they realize that they're going to lose connections with all of these people on a very official manner. I mean, they actually used to send letters to families basically declaring that I no longer want to have any contact with you. And that's what's heartbreaking. I mean, a lot of Scientology can be hilarious for people to like look at from the outside in terms of space aliens and the sci-fi writer who came up with this entire bizarre, space opera yarn that people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to believe, which is, it can be very ludicrous on the surface, especially if you take L Ron's speeches and his writings out of context and isolated. Like if I just told you the story of Xenu straight out, it's ludicrous. People laugh out loud at it, but it loses all of its humor when you meet people who've been utterly devastated by it, because a lot of these are smart people. These are people that they're targeting because they have the cash and they have the intellectual capacity to take on a lot of this ideology and immerse themselves in it. They're not looking for you're weak and you're sick. They usually really target urban professionals. They target dentists and doctors and lawyers. These are the people that they want, as part of their ranks.
So if there's any people in the audience who are conspiracy theorists, there you go. This is a conspiracy. It sounds like. You got that takes a lot of organization to keep this stuff secret, and.
Right.
I guess it's a common theme with some of the more modern religions like Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses is, if the love of God doesn't work, then threats might, and that isolation.
Well, a lot of that isolation that, again, with that book about Mormons that I read recently, they have that very same thing where if you try to walk away, you lose your community. They try to separate you from your family. And our guest a couple of weeks ago talked about how they were leveraging her children to either draw her back in, or that's it, and you're done with your kids. And it's really heartbreaking. And I write science fantasy, and my yarns, I don't confuse them with reality, and I would never dream of trying to manipulate all these people into it. But it's silly and funny to hear the story of Xenu on the one level, but it's heartbreaking when you look at all these lives that are devastated because of it, and it's important to remind people this is completely real for a lot of folks out there.
Yeah.
Right. Let me use Xenu as an example. So, to put Xenu in context, so I'm not going to explain what it is because I'm sure maybe not necessarily everybody's familiar with it, but the idea is that you're moving up this bridge. You're trying to become clear of basically past traumas. You're holding a lie detector that has, they call it an E-meter. It has two electrified cans that are running a small current through your body. And you're sitting with an auditor, which is basically almost like a blank slate psychiatrist, you could argue, though Scientologists would lose their minds to be compared in that way, because those are their mortal enemies. But this is basically why they want to replace psychiatry, is because some of its precepts are generally the same. But the idea is that I'm going to ask you these kind of hypnotic suggestions over and over, and we're going to go through my traumatic past, and then eventually we're going to start going through traumatic events that have happened in my past life. Now, mind you, this is going through a hypnotic phase. It's basically electrified hypnosis, which is important because I'm sure that does not sound like something that most people want to sign up for. Not to mention, I don't see my results while you're doing it. That belongs basically to the auditor, who can kind of tell me whatever they want. So you can add on your own manipulation from there. However, as you're moving up this bridge, you're under this impression, that you're under the belief that you are a godlike being, and you're trying to free yourself from all of these horrific memories that have happened to you, and you're trying to make yourself clear. In other words, when I talk about being molested as a child, it's going to give a spike on this E-meter, similar as it would on a polygraph. It reads your blood pressure, your sweat, things like that. I mean, it's complicated, but this is basically the easiest way to understand it. And so if I talk about the molestation and I have an emotional reaction to it, it's going to have a spike. Now, if the idea is that I would continue to talk about this until I no longer have a spike and it becomes level, right? And you could argue that I'm becoming free for that trauma, or you could also argue that I'm becoming flat. I'm becoming emotionally robotic. Matter of perspective.
And Scientology will bill you that entire time they're conducting this pseudo-psychotherapy, is that right?
Right.
I mean,
sorry, what?
And Scientology will effectively bill you for however many years you're willing to spend in this pseudo-therapy.
Hundreds of dollars an hour. I'm talking, these are like $500 an hour session, which
Really?
I think is also why they argue so bitterly against psychiatry, which I'm not particularly a fan of either. I'm not going to argue for lithium and trephination and electric shock. I mean, psychiatry is a whole nother issue, but it's an easy target. But I think a lot of it is that they want to frame it in the same way as psychiatry, like, well, you would pay a psychiatrist, $2,000 a month. Why not pay a Scientologist? That logically, I think, is what they're trying to replace and why they attack psychiatry so viciously. Not to mention that psychiatry is essentially what made L Ron bankrupt early on, and so he has a vendetta against him, period. But as you're moving up this bridge and you're going from level to level, then you reach basically the X-Men danger room, which is the OT levels. And these are all about basically gaining superpowers in general. It's called OT for operating Thetan. The idea is that you're gaining these cosmic extra powers with each phase. Well, when you reach OT level 3, which is advertised to you pretty much the whole way, all the way up, people are like, oh man, wait till you get to OT level 3. The true secrets of the universe will be revealed. In fact, it's actually called the Wall of Fire, because if you're not prepared for it, the idea is that you can catch pneumonia and die, that you can literally lose your mind instantaneously, throw yourself screaming from windows. I mean, it's basically viewed as like this is a transcendent moment where finally you're going to find out the forbidden knowledge of who we truly are, and knowledge that is so dangerous that it's going to take you a decade and $100,000 to achieve this secret knowledge. And when you hit OT level 3, that is when you finally discover the 75 million years ago. You get a briefcase that has a combination on it. You're led to a special room where it's put under guard. You can open it, and that's when you discover either typewritten, or sometimes you even get a photocopy of L Ron's scrawl that 75 million years ago there was an evil galactic warlord named Xenu who was the ruler of a planet called Tigiak, which is now known as Earth. And he had an overpopulated alien species, and as he was a tyrannical ruler, he massacred all of them in a cosmic genocide by putting them in volcanoes, dropping hydrogen bombs, and then the souls of these alien, this alien massacre actually are possessing your body, and you're almost like a flesh poltergeist in a way, that you are possessed by hundreds and thousands of these aliens, and that you need to sit alone in a room, hypnotizing yourself, paying $500 and $700 a session, to basically give therapy to these alien souls possessing you until they are relieved from their trauma, from this mass genocide, and that they themselves will fly away. And this is to, ideally free yourself from basically space cooties, as some ex-members have now called it.
Right.
Now, as hilarious and ludicrous as that sounds, to people who have been in the cult for that, to that point, one, you believe everything L Ron Hubbard says. Two, that they have many different logical loopholes that are able to counter it. Like, what's true is what's true for you, is a constant maxim that's said. That if it's confusing, you just kind of keep going, because the idea is that if you express doubt, then they can run you through sec checks, which is basically a really brutal interrogation that's can last for hours, where they try to dismantle you kind of psychologically, and you have to pay for that as well. So if you express doubt, you have to go backwards, and you keep getting sold it's the next step, the next step. Oh man, you can't wait till the next step. It's always this gold-plated carrot they keep dangling in front of you.
Right.
And not to mention, when people hit that level, they become terrified because they suddenly feel like they are possessed and inhabited by all of these other beings, right? And so if you're a believer, that's actually terrifying, because that's a new concept that hasn't been introduced to you yet. And then it sort of keeps spiraling out of control, where you go from OT level 3 and you kind of keep marching and keep trying to free yourself from these alien souls. The problem is also is that L Ron was basically losing his damn mind around this point, and had to keep kind of freestyling theology for you to buy. And then at some point he died. So there's no end climax. It just kind of keeps going. Even when you get to OT level 8, you're basically still trying to free these alien souls. And it gets very schizophrenic in a way, because these people start to feel that they're possessed. They have other souls possessing them and trying to control them, and they're trying to free them with this sort of exorcism. And, as funny as that stuff is, it's pretty horrific. It's the same way as that, like, growing up Baptist Christian, having the concept of hell smash into my mind on a regular basis is knowing that kids that I was on the playground with were literally going to be flayed alive and hung on meat hooks and, sodomized by 8-foot tall demons was actually part of what we were all supposed to believe is traumatic. That's madness. That is a horrible
we'd
thing
love to
inflict someone's head.
We'd like to transition into that kind of your views, not just on Scientology, but much broader view. We have a clip of you. One thing I did want to, say I didn't want to let it totally pass. With medicine and psychiatry, one difference is that their goal, in theory, I mean, there's lots of people that do bad things, but just the general rule for medicine is you're trying to help a person fix something so they can get on with their lives, whereas in a religion, you want them to get on with your agenda of Scientology. So I would draw the distinction. I think there is a lot of science behind psychiatry now, much more so than there was 100 years ago. But I understand your point. So anyway, we have another great clip of you that I'd like to see, and then come back and talk about religion more broadly.
Society, the church is talked down daily. So what if priests and small boys are out there having playdays? Oh, yes. Jesus is the reason war comes around so frequent. What's the fun in life without felonies or villains? Right. Yes, it's true what you heard of God and money and of death, but I'll be singing songs and praises till my dying breath. Christ, taste everlasting life. Get your wings, go to paradise. It's been here for some time. There's blood on every dime. Free wine and wafers, everybody get in line. Oh, you voted for that one with all that common sense. Then come them hallelujahs, amens and sacraments. Yes, it's true what you heard of God and money and of death, but I'll be singing songs and praises till my dying breath. For that Christ, taste everlasting life. Get your wings, go to paradise. Yes, it's true what you heard of God and money and of death, but I'll be singing songs and praises till my dying breath. For that sweet of Christ, taste everlasting life. Get your wings, go to paradise. Get your wings, go to paradise. Get your wings, go to paradise. Testicle of fire.
Man, that's good.
Yeah, now I apologize again. We had to cut some stuff out. I would have loved to show the whole video. Can you tell people where they can go to see your work in its entirety?
Again, you can go to just jamiedewolf.com, JMIE.DeWolf.com. That was a music video I directed for some friends. They approached me. I heard this song and I was like, I got to do this video. And so we met and we talked about it. I just pretty much, the song is like 2.5 minutes. It's absurdly short. But our whole concept was we just wanted to throw every single thing basically wrong with the world.
That's brilliant.
And a lot of it we actually filmed on Easter, which makes me very, very tickled. We recreated Jonestown on Easter. We had a black Jesus march down Broadway on Easter, followed by zombies and the Easter Bunny. And
Well, I love Santa. You know, white
Santa at the
Santa's
end.
been in the news with Fox, because everybody
Yeah.
knows that Santa's white. You had them. I like the priest spitting. It was brilliant.
The Jones style is a little bit disturbing.
Yeah. That was good. It was great because we had these kids that were down to do it, simply because we had Kool-Aid for them, and so they kept they're like, yeah, I'll do it. You know,
Hopefully
like,
just
all you gotta
Kool-Aid.
do is drink the Kool-Aid and then drop. And they're like,
Were any real children killed in the filming of your video?
no,
No people harming your video. Good.
A lot of people went to hell though.
Yeah. So you started to talk about your upbringing. Maybe you can, again, go back, tell us how you were raised, when you broke out of it, what broke you away from religion?
Yeah, so, to clarify is that, so my grandfather, L Ron Hubbard Jr., was a Scientologist in the early days, and he basically was like kind of his father's right-hand man. Then he left the church. Then he started battling against the church in his later years, pretty much until his death. But my mom was incredibly religious. In fact, she wanted to be a missionary, and that was how she met my father. And I grew up incredibly religious, Baptist, all kinds of variations, really. And I was pretty profoundly devout. I carried the picture Bible with me everywhere. It's the best version of the Bible. It's like a comic book. And I mean, I was passing out pamphlets about, the apocalypse and Armageddon. The Antichrist was pretty much my boogeyman when I was a kid. And, I used to go to churches and speak in tongues. There was a Bible camp I was led to that, this is on my CD, which you can download off my website. But there was literally a Bible camp I went to that they told us that the rapture was happening on Saturday. And we went out and stood in the field and waited for him. And then just kind of all sort of quietly and ashamedly went back to our tents. And that I was pretty devout for many, many years. And until I was about in the, really until actually I started going to a Walnut Creek Christian Academy when I was in the 7th grade. And I just started asking a lot of questions that kids weren't asking in class, that I was asking quite sincerely, in terms of just doing more reading about the Christian era, more reading about the Bible itself. Trying to understand what were the Dead Sea Scrolls, what was the Nicene Council, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and where did the rest of humanity come from? Where do Aztecs go? Are they simply doomed to go to hell because missionaries didn't arrive here for centuries? Which I think are pretty basic theological questions that I think are fair. And
questions will always get you in
trouble. I have a serious
trouble.
problem arguing with any Christian at all that I feel like I know more than they do, because they want to go into stuff. And I'm like, you know what? If you don't have even curiosity about the historical roots, I mean, you're talking about actual places. The field Armageddon is a real field where the end battle is supposed to happen. I mean, you should have some cognizance of these kinds of things and curiosity at least. And the answers I was getting were actually moving me away from Christianity. And that was actually when I also started to just question everything. I started even to question my own family's history. I started to investigate who L Ron Hubbard really was, because before that, I really just kind of grew up with him he was actually as a child one of my biggest inspirations, because he was a writer and I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't know that he was a cult leader, because that was pretty much kept from me. And I had to learn a lot of that on my own and started asking more uncomfortable questions and doing a lot of my own digging around and realizing that through the context of Scientology being a cult, looking at the larger context in terms of that we're living in a cult-driven society, in a cult-driven universe, but in America in particular, you're living in something where a cult is able to basically commandeer history and write public policy. Nearly every elected official that we have, that we are handing power to over our children, our military, our financial systems, most political people in office enact cannibalistic, vampiric rites every Sunday, and it's not in secret. They're there with everybody else, standing in line. They're all drinking blood. They're all eating flesh. They're all worshiping at the feet of a godlike man of a patriarchal trinity, which is a father, a son, and a ghost. And so once I started to pull that away and realize that everything, even the roots of most obscenities, are based on a very Judeo-Christian root, And it sort of dismantled everything for me in a very horrifying way. And me and my parents, we had a huge, basically falling out primarily because of religion, more than anything else, because they felt that they was literally losing their son, who they had hoped was at one day going to be a potentially a minister.
I hear that too often.
That was actually what I was kind of interested in doing, and obviously later ended up as a performer, and I host monthly shows here out all the time, and so I took a lot of that kind of ancestry and that DNA, I guess, and spun it in my own way. I by no means think I'm a cult leader, but I've been accused of it when I'm in fine form and super on point. When I'm hosting a show in front of 700 people, I can achieve that power and make people do insane things just by sheer will and voice. And but that to me is that ministers and preachers, it's all showmanship anyways. There's a reason why Khan is in confidence. The difference between a cult leader and a circus ringleader, it's not really that much of a difference when it comes to the performance tropes of it, of how do you control an audience, how do you use your volume, how do you move in a way that's going to command power. These are just stage tricks. It's all stagecraft. And L Ron was just as good of it as anybody else.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to get back to the point just before I forget it, it flips out of my mind, where you said about curiosity. Richard Dawkins just put out his book about the sense of wonder in science, and we saw with George Bush, who was the most incurious individual in human history. And
he's like, nope, I'm done. I'm good. I don't need
all
to
the
know
tragedy that led to, and how religion, one of the real harms it does is it beats this curiosity out of you. And you wouldn't be where you are if you weren't curious, didn't investigate, and didn't forge this different life for yourself. Then you would have very easily drifted into, but for your curiosity.
Of course, you had some help though, because to bring it back to this season, I think that one of the best instructors for religion is Santa Claus, where you believe in this thing deeply, and then you find out it's false, and then you apply that to your religious belief. You sort of had, your Santa Claus was Scientology. You looked at that, and that informed you of your religious beliefs.
Well, what's like Santa Claus is a good example, right? So I had to debate, I have a daughter, and I had to debate, am I going to continue to foster this heinous lie that though we don't even have a chimney, somehow a man she's never met who lives a continent away is going to sneak into our house and leave her gifts, but also has a sense of morality and is basically the eye of Sauron, who can see through all and can see every sin that you've committed over the year and will pass judgment as to whether or not you are worthy of getting a new Tonka truck or the doll that you really so desperately desire. Santa's kind of given this sense of he's the ultimate judge. It's like put your heart and a feather on a scale, and we'll see if you get how much candy you get on Christmas. And as ludicrous as that is, because I remember Santa Claus is a good example too, because I would I'd be like, well, how does Santa know that I wanted that? I didn't even put that on my Santa list, or stuff that was obvious that I knew my parents got me. Santa doesn't want to give me socks. Why would he give me socks? And I remember that really bothered me as a kid, that I was trying to logically explain it. My mom would just be like, shh, it's just, don't ruin it. And I feel a lot of Christianity and a lot of religions the same way. It's it's just this kind of ludicrous idea that is comical, but however it has pretty serious damage. When kids learn that all of their parents and authority figures are complicit in lying to them, that's actually offensive. I remember that moment kind of logically processing and being like, wait a minute, this whole time you've been lying to my face? It's like when you throw a surprise party for your girlfriend or your boyfriend, it's like you're actually demonstrating to them how cleverly and conclusively you can lie to their face. It's for their benefit, it's for a happy thing. It's a surprise, but I conclusively prove to you that I can lie to you consistently over and over, and you won't you won't be able to use magic tricks to sense past it. And a lot of religion, to me, works in the same way. It's like, to me, it's just like, when is it ever gonna stop? I don't know when that's gonna happen. I mean, I still feel it's 2013. We can visit other planets. We can clone humans. We're no doubt cloning humans somewhere in some laboratory. Some military is pretty apt and interested in making sure that happens. And yet we're still arguing with scientists that there's a magic boat with 2 of every animal, and there's a talking snake and a magical garden and a forbidden fruit, and they will argue toe to toe that this is science. And then now you have apologists being like, well, it's just a folklore, it's just mythic.
Metaphor.
And that's very convenient after you've attempted to reverse 2,000 plus years of scientific progress based on basically a mixtape that was put together in a book that we called the Bible.
Right. You know, one of the other harms of religion that we talk about is it teaches kids from that early plastic stage of their brain that magical thinking is okay, it's the way to go, who needs logic, who needs reason, who needs skepticism, and then you beat that into them culturally as well. And then you get grown-ups who sit on the Supreme Court and believe in magical things and pass things that are very anti-women, anti-black, anti-Latino, and they're good with it, and they're righteous about it, and they think they're doing God's work. And it's a devastating problem for society.
Yeah, kind of trouble with that scaly Satan exists.
Oh, I got in a lot of trouble for mentioning this in an interview last year during the presidential election. But I made a point that if Mitt Romney was a Scientologist, right, and was not a Mormon, because you notice that the whole issue of him being Mormon was completely sidestepped. It was never brought up in the presidential debates. Obama's team just stayed clear away from it, right? But if Mitt Romney was a Scientologist, would we be questioning his religious beliefs? Would it become the same thing where they come up and they'd be like, look, this guy's going to give all of our money to L Ron Hubbard's society. He's going to give, for his entire life, 25% of his monthly income goes to Scientology. Would that be a factor? Would that change voters' minds? And I think a lot of it is that I've been on so many shows that are more than happy to take shots at Scientology and be like, oh, Xenu, and then who do these people think they are? And they got spaceships floating around. And some of these actual shows that I've been on, these conservative hosts are happy to take shots at what they label as a cult. But if I replace everything if we looked at American history instead, just for sake of argument, and Obama was a Scientologist, and George Bush was a Scientologist, and Clinton was a Scientologist, and everybody in Senate at least had to at least show up at Scientology meetings, whether or not they're a lying pathological womanizer or whatever. They still had to at least make a show of it. I think we could all argue that it's like, this is dangerous to, shouldn't we be questioning what are the roots of this religion and how this affects
policy? We need to question
policy?
everything, but this has flown by. We got 15 seconds left. Jamie, I hope we get to talk to you again. That's fabulous. I remember you told me how they didn't want to hear that stuff. We'd love to hear that. Thank you for joining us.
Another time. I can talk a lot, apparently.
Okay.
Go to JamieTheWolf.com. Thank you.
All right. Good. See everybody next Sunday.